I didn't realize the man on the side of the highway was walking toward me until I saw him looking through my rear window. That was the moment I knew something was wrong. I had been driving alone through northern Arizona after visiting my sister for the weekend. It was just before midnight, and I still had several hours left before I reached home. The highway was almost completely empty. There were no buildings for miles, no streetlights, just a long stretch of road cutting through open desert. I remember checking my phone because I was bored. It was 11:52. My sister had texted me a few minutes earlier asking me to let her know when I got home. I replied that I would. Then I put the phone in the cup holder and kept driving. About 10 minutes later, I noticed a man walking along the shoulder. He was facing away from traffic. He had a dark backpack over one shoulder and was wearing jeans and a light-colored jacket. I thought he was probably someone whose car had broken down. I slowed down slightly. Then I remembered something my sister had told me before I left. She had warned me not to stop for strangers on isolated roads. So I kept going. As I passed him, I glanced in the rearview mirror. The man had stopped walking. He was watching my car. I didn't think much of it. A few minutes later, I saw headlights behind me. At first I assumed it was another traveler. The vehicle got closer. It was a dark SUV. It stayed behind me for several minutes without passing. I sped up a little. It stayed with me. I changed lanes. It changed lanes too. That made me uncomfortable, but I still tried to tell myself it was nothing. Then I noticed the man from the shoulder. He was standing farther down the road. I had passed him several miles earlier. There was no reason he should have been ahead of me. I stared at him as I approached. This time he wasn't walking. He was standing next to the road with one arm raised. I drove past him. The SUV behind me didn't. It pulled onto the shoulder and slowed down beside him. I watched through my rearview mirror. The SUV stopped. The man got into it. I felt a wave of relief. I thought, finally, the situation made sense. Maybe the SUV was his ride. Maybe he'd been waiting for someone. I kept driving. Then, about 5 minutes later, the SUV came back up behind me. It didn't pass. It stayed very close. I could barely see its headlights in my mirrors because it was following so closely. I started getting nervous. I decided to pull into a gas station at the next exit. The sign appeared a few miles later. I took the exit. The gas station was open, but almost empty. There was one pickup parked beside the convenience store. I pulled close to the building and got out. The SUV followed me into the parking lot. It parked on the opposite side. The driver didn't get out. I went inside. There was an older man working behind the counter. I bought a bottle of water and a coffee. Then I stood near the window. The SUV was still there. The cashier looked outside. Then he looked at me. He asked, "You know them?" I said no. He stared at the SUV for another second. Then he said, "Don't leave yet." I asked why. He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he locked the front door. That scared me more than anything else that night. I asked him what was happening. He told me the same SUV had been sitting outside for almost 20 minutes before I arrived. I asked if anyone had gone inside. He said no. Then he told me something else. There were 2 people in it. I asked if he was sure. He said he'd seen them clearly, one in the driver's seat, one in the back. I looked outside again. The SUV's windows were tinted too dark to see through. The cashier told me to call the police. I did. While I was on the phone, the SUV suddenly drove away. The dispatcher told me to stay inside. A highway patrol officer arrived about 15 minutes later. I explained everything. He asked me if I had gotten out of my car at any point. I said no. He asked whether I had stopped anywhere earlier. I told him I'd stopped at a gas station about an hour before. He asked which one. I gave him the name. He wrote it down. Then he asked something strange. "Did you speak to anybody there?" I said no. He looked at me. "Nobody?" I thought about it. "No." He nodded and told me he would have someone check the cameras. Then he asked me to follow him to the police station in the nearest town. I was grateful. I followed his cruiser back onto the highway. For the first time that night, I felt safe. About 20 minutes into the drive, the officer pulled into a rest area. He parked and waited for me. I pulled in behind him. He got out and approached my driver's window. Then he said something that made my stomach drop. "The SUV is back." I looked behind me. Nothing. He pointed toward the highway. Far in the distance, I could see headlights. The officer told me to stay inside my vehicle. He walked back toward his cruiser. The SUV passed the entrance to the rest area without slowing down. I watched it disappear. The officer got back into his vehicle. He told me we'd continue. I followed him for another half hour. Eventually, we reached a small police station. I gave them my information. They checked the highway cameras. The officer came back after a while. He said they'd found the SUV on several cameras. It had been following me for nearly 40 miles. I asked why. He said they didn't know. Then he told me they had also found something on the previous gas station's camera. The station I'd stopped at earlier that night. I asked, "What?" He said there was a man standing near my car after I walked inside. I hadn't noticed anyone. The video showed him looking directly through my windshield. Then he walked around to the passenger side. The officer said he appeared to be talking on a phone. I asked if they could identify him. They couldn't. The image quality wasn't good enough. But they had something else. A second camera showed the dark SUV parked across the road. It had been there the entire time. I asked if the SUV was registered. The officer said yes. It belonged to a man who lived in the next county. Then he said the man had been arrested before, not for kidnapping, for breaking into vehicles at rest stops. I asked if they thought he had followed me from that gas station. The officer said they couldn't prove it, but they were treating it seriously. I ended up staying with my sister for another day because I didn't want to drive that road again alone. The following afternoon, a detective called me. He said they had recovered the SUV. It had been abandoned behind an old warehouse. The owner had disappeared. They searched it. There were no people inside, but they found several things. A flashlight, 2 pairs of gloves, a phone, and a small notebook. The detective said my license plate was written inside it. So was the license plate of another woman who had reported being followed on the same highway a few weeks earlier. I asked what else was in the notebook. He said there were several dates. Some had names beside them. Some didn't. Then he said something that I still think about. The date next to my plate wasn't the date I was followed. It was 2 days earlier. I asked what he meant. He said someone had apparently written down my license plate before I ever made that trip. I couldn't understand how. Then he reminded me about the first gas station, the one I'd stopped at an hour before I met the man on the shoulder. I suddenly remembered something I'd completely forgotten. When I came out of the store, I had noticed a man standing beside my car. I thought he was looking for his keys. I had apologized because I thought I was blocking him. He moved away. I hadn't thought about it since. I told the detective. He asked me to describe him. The description matched the man from the highway. I couldn't sleep that night. I kept thinking about how close I'd come to opening my passenger door at that gas station. A few weeks later, I sold the car. I didn't want it anymore. The new owner called me once. He said he had found something inside the glove compartment. A tiny piece of paper had been folded underneath the owner's manual. He asked if it belonged to me. It didn't. He read what was written on it over the phone. It was my sister's name, and underneath it was her phone number. I had never written her number down anywhere in that car. To this day, I don't know how someone connected my license plate to my sister, but I do know one thing. The man on the highway wasn't trying to get help. He was trying to find out whether I was alone. And when I think back to that night, I realize he got his answer long before I ever noticed him. The first time I saw the pickup truck, it was already parked on the shoulder about half a mile ahead of me. I remember thinking it was strange because there was nothing around it. No house, no gas station, no broken down car, just this old dark pickup sitting there with its headlights off. I passed it without slowing down. Then, maybe 5 minutes later, I saw the exact same truck behind me. I knew it was the same one because of the missing piece of chrome around the driver's side headlight. At first, I figured it had been parked farther back than I thought. That was the explanation I gave myself. I was driving home alone after a late shift at a warehouse outside Knoxville. It was a little after 2 in the morning, and I still had more than an hour left to drive. Before you keep listening, take a second and think about where you're listening from right now and what time it is where you are. Because when this happened to me, I became very aware of how different a familiar road feels when you're the only person on it. The truck stayed behind me for maybe 10 minutes. Then it moved into the passing lane. It came up beside me slowly. I glanced over. The driver's window was dark. I couldn't see the driver's face. Then it passed me and kept going. I watched its taillights disappear. A few minutes later, I saw it again. Behind me. I actually laughed. I thought maybe I was getting tired. Maybe I had mixed up the truck with another one. So I slowed down. The truck slowed down too. I sped up. It sped up. It sped up. I changed lanes. So did the truck. That's when I stopped thinking it was a coincidence. I took the next exit. There was a gas station at the bottom of the ramp, still open. I pulled in and parked under the brightest light I could find. The truck passed the exit without turning. I watched it disappear down the highway. I went inside, bought a coffee, and stood near the counter for a few minutes. The cashier was a middle-aged woman who barely looked up when I came in. I asked how late they stayed open. She said, all night. Then she looked past me through the window. Her face changed. She asked, "Is that your truck?" I turned around. The same pickup was parked at the very back of the lot. It had somehow gotten off the highway ahead of me. I asked if she had seen it pull in. She said no. She had been watching the entrance because there had been almost no customers that night. I looked through the glass again. The truck was sitting there with its engine running. No one was getting out. I told her I was going to call the police. She nodded and said, "Don't go back to your car yet." That was the first thing anyone had said that made me actually scared. I called 911. While I was talking to the dispatcher, the truck pulled out of the parking lot. It passed right in front of the windows. The headlights were on. For a second, I could see through the windshield. The driver's seat looked empty. I told the dispatcher that. She asked if I was sure. I said yes. She told me to stay inside. About 15 minutes later, a deputy arrived. He walked around the parking lot with his flashlight. Then he came inside and asked me to describe the truck. I did. He asked whether I had gotten out of my vehicle on the highway before I reached the gas station. I said no. He looked at me for a second. Then he said, "You need to tell me everything." I told him about the truck passing me twice. He listened quietly. Then he asked whether I had noticed anyone near my car. I said no. He asked if I'd heard anything unusual. Again, no. He walked outside and looked at my car. Then he called me over. There was something tucked underneath the rear windshield wiper, a folded piece of paper. I hadn't put it there. The deputy told me not to touch it. He pulled it out with gloves. There were only 4 words written on it. "I saw you stop." I felt sick. The deputy looked toward the highway. He told me to wait inside while another unit checked the surrounding roads. I called my younger brother and told him what was happening. While I was talking to him, my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I answered. Nobody spoke. I could hear my own breathing. Then, very quietly, someone said, "You still there?" I hung up. My brother heard it. He asked me who it was. I said I didn't know. Then another call came in. This time, the number was mine. My own phone number was calling me. I stared at the screen. My brother asked what was happening. I answered, nothing. Just the sound of an engine idling. Then I heard a horn. Not from the phone. From outside. I looked through the window. The pickup was back. It was parked beside the building. The deputy hadn't returned yet. I told the cashier. She locked the front door. The truck sat there for maybe 30 seconds. Then it drove away. The deputy came back a few minutes later. He told me they had driven several miles in both directions and hadn't found anyone. Then he asked me something I'll never forget. "Was the paper under your rear wiper when you left your house?" I said I had no idea. He nodded. He told me they had found fresh footprints in the mud beside my car. Someone had been standing directly behind it. I asked how long they'd been there. He said they were recent. Very recent. Very recent. The deputy told me not to drive home. He followed me to my brother's house instead. I didn't drive alone that night. A week later, my car was still parked at my brother's place. I finally took it to a mechanic. He called me that afternoon. He said he had found something under the car. A small tracking device had been attached behind the rear bumper. He asked how long I'd had the vehicle. I told him about 6 months. He said the device hadn't been there long. I asked if he could tell when it had been installed. He said probably within the previous few days. Then he paused. He asked me something strange. "Did you stop anywhere unusual that week?" I told him about the gas station. He said, "No, I mean before that. I thought about it. There was only one place, a supermarket near my work. I had parked there for about 20 minutes. The mechanic went quiet. Then he said, 'You should probably tell the police.' I did. They never found out who placed the tracker. They never found the pickup. And to this day, I don't know whether the truck had been following me that night, or whether someone had been following me for days before I ever noticed it. The part that bothers me most isn't the note. It's that whoever left it knew exactly where I had stopped, and I had never told anyone I was going to that gas station." I knew something was wrong when the truck driver waved at me from inside a vehicle that had been parked on the highway for less than a minute. I was driving home from a wedding in western Pennsylvania with my friend Ryan. It was late, probably around 1 in the morning, and we were still about 2 hours from home. Ryan had been asleep for most of the drive. I was tired too, but not nearly tired enough to pull over. The highway had narrowed to 2 lanes in each direction, and there were long stretches where we wouldn't see another car for several minutes. I remember checking the clock. It was 1:17. Before you keep listening, think about where you're hearing this from and what time it is there. Because when you're alone on a highway late at night, even normal things can start feeling wrong. The first thing that happened was probably completely harmless. A white tractor trailer passed us. The driver was going much faster than I was, so I barely looked at it. About 15 minutes later, I saw the same truck parked on the shoulder ahead. Its hazard lights were flashing. As I passed, I noticed the driver standing outside. He raised one hand toward me. I didn't stop. I figured he was asking for help, but there was a perfectly good emergency phone number on every highway sign, and there were still plenty of cars around. Ryan woke up when we passed. He looked over his shoulder. "Was that guy waving at us?" "Yeah." "Did you stop?" "No." He shrugged and went back to sleep. About 10 minutes later, I noticed the truck behind us. Same white trailer. Same company logo. Same dirty stripe along the bottom. I thought the driver had gotten his truck moving again and caught up. Then it passed us. The driver didn't look over. A few minutes later, we saw the truck parked on the shoulder again. This time, it was on the opposite side of the highway. I looked at Ryan. He was awake now. "Didn't we just pass that?" "Yeah." We both watched it as we went by. The driver wasn't standing beside it this time. The cab was empty. I remember joking that maybe there were 2 identical trucks. Ryan didn't laugh. We kept driving. Around 20 minutes later, traffic started slowing down. There was a line of cars ahead of us. At first, I thought there had been an accident. Then we saw why. A pickup truck had stopped in the middle of the right lane. Its hood was up. A man was standing beside it, waving for people to move over. I slowed down. Ryan said, "Don't stop." I wasn't planning to. As we moved into the left lane, the man stepped closer to the middle of the road. He was waving both hands now. I looked at his face. He looked terrified. Then I noticed the white tractor trailer parked on the shoulder behind him. It was the same truck. Ryan sat forward. "Keep going." I did. We passed them. The truck stayed where it was. We drove for another several miles. Then my phone rang. It was my friend who had been at the wedding. I answered through Bluetooth. He asked if we were still driving. I said yes. Then he said, "Don't take the next exit." I asked why. He said his cousin had just called him and told him there had been a robbery somewhere along that highway. I laughed because that sounded unrelated. Then he told me something else. Apparently, someone has been stopping cars by pretending their vehicle broke down. I stopped laughing. I asked where. He said he didn't know exactly, just somewhere along the route we were taking. I told him we'd be careful. When the call ended, Ryan looked at me. Take the next exit. I asked why. He said, I don't like this road anymore. So I did. We took the next exit and pulled into a 24-hour convenience store. There were a few cars parked outside. I filled the tank while Ryan went inside. When I came back around the car, I saw him standing by the door, staring across the parking lot. I asked what he was looking at. He pointed. The white truck was parked across the street. It was too far away to see the driver clearly. But it was there. Ryan said, How did it get here before us? I didn't have an answer. We got back into the car. I started the engine. The truck didn't move. I pulled out of the parking lot and headed toward the town. The truck stayed across the street. For the first few minutes, I thought we had lost it. Then headlights appeared behind us. It was the truck. I picked up my speed. It stayed behind us. Ryan grabbed his phone and opened the camera. Why are you recording? He said, just in case. I told him to call the police. He did. The dispatcher asked where we were. Ryan gave her the road name and told her we were being followed. She told us to drive to the nearest police station. There was one about 20 minutes away. We followed the directions. The truck stayed behind us the whole time. It never got closer. It never fell back. It just stayed there. At one point, I saw another set of headlights ahead. A sedan was coming toward us in the opposite lane. As it got closer, the white truck flashed its high beams. The sedan flashed back. Then the sedan pulled onto the shoulder. The truck passed us. I thought it was finally leaving. Then the sedan pulled out behind us. For a few seconds, I thought maybe the driver was another person who had noticed something strange. Then I realized the sedan had no front license plate. Ryan noticed it too. Don't stop. I kept driving. The truck was now ahead of us. The sedan was behind us. We were stuck between them. Then the truck suddenly slowed down. I moved into the left lane to pass. The sedan sped up. It moved alongside us. Ryan rolled up his window even though it was already closed. The passenger in the sedan was looking directly at us. He pointed toward the shoulder. Then he pointed at our car. I didn't know what that meant. The sedan dropped back. The truck turned off ahead. We were almost at the police station. I could see lights in the distance. Then our car made a loud popping sound. The steering wheel jerked. The tire pressure warning came on. I knew immediately what had happened. We had a flat. I pulled onto the shoulder. Ryan looked at me. Don't get out. I didn't. The sedan passed us. The driver looked over. Then it kept going. For several seconds, there was no traffic. Then the white truck appeared. It came from the opposite direction. It crossed the median. I watched it turn toward us. Ryan said, What is he doing? The truck drove directly onto the shoulder. I locked the doors. It stopped about 30 feet ahead of us. The driver got out. I could see him clearly. It was the same man who had waved at us earlier. He started walking toward our car. Ryan was already talking to the dispatcher. He put the phone on speaker. The dispatcher told us not to get out. The man kept walking. He wasn't carrying anything. He looked completely calm. When he got about 10 feet away, he stopped. Then he raised both hands. He said, You need to get out. Your tire's cut, I said through the closed window. We're waiting for the police. He looked toward the highway, then back at us. He said, They're not coming. I asked what he meant. He smiled. Then he walked back to his truck. Ryan whispered, We're leaving. I told him we had a flat. He said, I don't care. He reached down and unlocked the passenger door. I thought he was crazy. But before he could open it, we heard sirens. The white truck pulled away immediately. It crossed the median again and disappeared. The police arrived less than a minute later. 2 cruisers stopped behind us. Officers got out with their weapons drawn. They searched the surrounding area. The truck was gone. The sedan was gone. The only thing left was our car. One officer checked the tire. He called another officer over. Then he asked me how long we'd been driving on it. I told him we had only noticed the flat seconds earlier. He shook his head. The tire hadn't gone flat from normal damage. Someone had cut it, cleanly, with a knife or something similar. The officer asked us to step away from the vehicle. While they searched it, another officer walked toward the shoulder where the white truck had stopped. He found something in the grass. A small metal object. It turned out to be a tire deflation tool. The kind someone could place under a tire so that it would puncture the rubber when a vehicle moved over it. The officer told us the truck had likely been following us from the highway. But then he asked why the driver would bother with the tire if he already had us stopped. I didn't know. Neither did he. Then Ryan remembered something. He took out his phone and showed the officer the recording he'd made earlier. The video started when the white truck was following us. The officer watched it. Then he stopped the video. He zoomed in on the truck's windshield. He asked Ryan to go back. Ryan did. The officer pointed at the passenger side of the cab. There was someone sitting there. I couldn't see the face. But there was definitely a person. The officer told us the driver wasn't alone. That was the first time I understood what they might have been trying to do. One person could create a reason to stop us. Another could wait until we got out. I asked whether this had happened before. The officer didn't want to speculate, but he told us there had been several reports over the previous few months of drivers being stopped on that stretch of highway. In every case, the victims described a large white truck. Nobody had been arrested. They never found the people responsible. The officer arranged for a tow truck to take our car to a repair shop. Ryan and I stayed at the station until morning. Around 6:30, an officer came in and told us they had found the white truck. It had been abandoned in a wooded area about 5 miles from where we'd been stopped. The cab was empty. The trailer was empty too, but they found something inside the cab. A list. Several license plate numbers were written on it. Ours was at the top. Underneath it was the license plate of the sedan that had followed us. The officer said they were still investigating. We got a ride home that morning. I never drove that stretch of highway at night again. A few months later, Ryan sent me the original video. I hadn't watched it since that night. I skipped through it until I found the moment the white truck first passed us. The footage was shaky, but you could see the passenger clearly for maybe 2 seconds. He wasn't watching the road. He wasn't looking at us either. He was looking down at something in his hands. A piece of paper. I paused the video and zoomed in. It was a printed photograph. It was a picture of my car, taken from behind, and the photo had been taken before we ever reached the highway. To this day, I have no idea where they got it, but I know one thing. They weren't randomly choosing cars that night. They had been watching mine before I ever saw them. And somewhere out there, someone had decided that my car was worth following.